Sure, Tom, go ahead, start the meeting.
Okay, welcome
Please.
everybody. And as was so noted, this is being recorded, the meeting's being recorded. And so the first order of business is to accept the agenda for tonight's meeting. Would anyone like to make a motion on that?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, ayes have it. And approval of the minutes from November 4th. Somebody like to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second,
Aye.
all in favor? Aye,
Aye.
Aye.
ayes have it. And approving the meetings for the rest of the year, basically, beginning April 14th. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve those.
Second,
Aye.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, Tom's aye. Okay, it's approved. All right. Is Charlie with us yet?
Actually, we have Janet, Director of Culture and Tourism, who was going to give us an update on children's beach activities for 4th of July.
Terrific.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah, we've changed up the 4th of July this year because we saw there was an opportunity to do that. And we have moved the activities that we normally did on Main Street, some of the activities that we normally did on Main Street to Children's Beach. We're adding new activities to Main Street. And we are reducing the impact of the water fight between the fire companies. We're limiting it to the water. The water fight will be between the two fire trucks. We're not inviting the public to participate in that this year, and they will be in a fenced-in area. So on Children's Beach, we've had a committee or work group that's been meeting since October, thinking this through and now working on outreach. At Children's Beach, we'll have the Mat Fee Tea Toss, a photo booth, a cornhole tournament, a Nisha photo booth, a puppet show, a bike parade, and maybe a hat parade. And Nisha is going to join us down there with some, perhaps with a program about adopting animals and perhaps with a child-friendly animal that's up for adoption as well. And we'll run those activities between 10 and 11:30. And then the water fight will start at Main Street at noon. So we'll give people time to get from Children's Beach to Main Street. Would you like to know what's going on around Main Street as well? Just out of curiosity? Yeah, at Main Street, we are going to have, I think we're going to have food trucks on Federal Street starting around 9 in the morning. They'll get in there a little earlier so they can set up. We will have the farmer's market next to the Catholic Church because the church fair is on Saturday and not on the 4th. And the chamber is hosting an entrepreneur showcase at the Athenaeum, featuring a dozen or so people who are doing new startups to really show what they're up to. They're not really selling anything. They're just sort of talking about what it's like to be an entrepreneur in that area. And then we'll also have musical performances and the national anthem done that's being organized by the Community Music Center. And the Unitarian Church has graciously moved the reading of the Declaration from 9 a.m. till 10 a.m. And they are working with the Dreamland to do a simulcast of it in that theater as well, so more people can participate in it. So there are a lot of new things going on. There are a lot of old things rethought. And I think it's going to be fun and festive for people of all ages between 10 and 12 on the 4th of July. I'll take any questions.
Bye.
And I should say that Charlie's managing the events on Main Street while David and I manage the events at Children's Beach. And of course, we'll have the fireworks on the 4th of July as well, weather dependent.
Well, I think you can expect a busy summer because people are looking to bust out, you know? So you're gonna, I think you'd be surprised about the turnout.
That sounds great, Janet. I think people are going to, like Tom says, come out in numbers and be really happy to see each other's faces and as long as the weather holds out.
We've got some great signage that's going to take place. We're going to have a map of where these different things are and a big social media campaign to let people know about all the new and different things and to tell them to leave their bazookas and their water balloons at home. Good luck with that.
So I had a question about that. So is it just, it's just the firefighters having the water fight? And it's
Yeah,
like,
well,
a
they're gonna have a contest. They're gonna have a 55-gallon drum near each fire truck, and whoever fills up the other 55-gallon drum first wins. Now, the fire chief has also suggested to me that if I have people in the crowd that I'd like hosed, he'd be happy to do that for me. But, you know, the people will get wet, but we're just trying to reduce the safety issues around wet cobblestones and people with bazookas hitting little old ladies with back problems and small children, and not really seeming to care very much about that. So that's why the fire chief reimagined the fire contest to just be between the two companies. And they'll be in an enclosed area. There'll be these the things that were outside of Rosencrown this year that look like bike racks. That kind of fencing will be surrounding the upper part of Lower Main Street between Federal and the bank. And that's where that contest will take place.
and I was also, go ahead, Janet.
I'm saying, so be nice to me if you don't want me to give you a name to the fire chief.
You're not vindictive, are you, Janet?
Just today.
And I was just curious why the timing got changed from 9 to 10.
Because the water fight won't happen until noon, and the reading takes from 10 to 11, and there would be this gap in time that we
Okay.
couldn't figure out how to fill. And we also wanted to encourage people to mill around in the different locations as well. And the people who are reading the Declaration and the Unitarian Church folks are very excited to have it an hour later. I think they'd like to sleep in after the 3rd of July.
And my final question was, I know in the past we moved the fireworks to the 5th because of it might being too dangerous to be on the 4th. But it will be on the 4th this year.
Yes, after COVID and the amount of time that I spent with the select board discussing when it was going to be and when it wasn't going to be.
Yeah.
And it was always the question, why wasn't it on the 3rd? Well, the contract that we had for 3 years said anytime between the 3rd and the 5th. And it turned out that the fireworks company couldn't find a barge for the 4th for the amount of money that we were willing to pay or that the contract allowed. So this year we said, first choice is the 4th. That raised the price of the fireworks by about 30% because the price of a barge on the 4th of July is 30% more than one on the 3rd or the 5th of July. And it was the intention and the desire of the select board to have it back on the 4th. And the police department decided that they had tamed down the beach parties enough that they had enough staff that they could staff the fireworks as well as the managing the different beaches and what was going on in those locations.
All right.
Okay, anybody else have questions of Janet? Okay, so well, Charlie, you want to introduce yourself? Charlie's our new, we all know who he is, and we're happy to have him on board, and great
Thank you, Janet.
addition. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
Actually, Mary
I'm sorry.
from the Historical Association was up next.
I apologize. I can't
That's okay.
read. Sorry.
And I swapped them around so then Weston and Sam can have the rest of basically the rest of the time.
Oh, so you pulled a quick one on me. It wasn't me.
I
after
tried.
all.
I
Oh,
tried.
Lord.
Mary was here last year to present her event.
Yes, yes. And I'm here to present the same. Thank you for having us. I'm from the Nantucket Historical Association. I'm the Director of Education there. And we have planned, and we had tried to do it we had planned with the community sailing last year, but that's not going to work with us this year. So we're just flying solo to run a Wampanoag community celebration that will be free to the public. We would like to do it at Children's Beach, and we picked a date of August 10th, which is a Wednesday. It would be approximately maybe 10 to 4, 11 to 4, depending on what you guys say we can do. But the event basically would really, it serves to educate, to really celebrate the Wampanoag people who are native to Nantucket and their connection to the Nantucket history, and really elaborate on their story. We have Darius Coombs, who has built a Machoon for us. We commissioned it, which is a dugout canoe. And we have that here on Nantucket. And our intention is to have him paddle towards the beach for people to see. He'd be dressed in his native costume and come to Children's Beach and talk about the process of making the Machoon, and then hopefully we can just take people out in it safely. So that's another piece of the thing where he could take people to paddle around just a short distance off of the beach, kids and parents and things like that. The thing is about, it's made from a maple tree. And it's a burned out canoe. It's really amazing. And we've been using it. We did a lecture on it last fall because he brought it over, and we have it now. And we have also used it for education in the schools. And it's gotten a lot of play. Kids love this. We would have several tables on the lawn. We would do no tents. We would just have tables that would have crafts that kids and families could participate in. So it's a make and take of the various kinds of traditional crafts of the Wampanoag and Native peoples, as well as we'd have an artifact table with some artifacts that Darius and the other curators from the Mashpee Wampanoags would bring, and people could, some of them they can handle, some of them they can see, but it's all about the things that they have, and it's really interesting for them to see. And then we also have some performers who would do, there's a group, I think it's maybe 4 or 5 of them, that would do some traditional dance and music. So our thought was to have this open to free to the public and set it up in a fashion that this is ongoing, so people can drop in. We don't have, it's not a program that is from this time to this time, but as people come, the people from the tribe would engage at the tables, and with the dance would probably be at a specific time, more towards the afternoon, maybe 2 or 3 o'clock, and the canoe would be available the entire time, and the crafts and things like that. We would have we'd have plenty of staff there from the NHA, as well as people from the Wampanoags that are coming over to do this, the Mashpee Wampanoags. So that's what we have intended. We've been doing, more and more programming surrounding the Indigenous people and telling their story and their connection to Nantucket. And really, they were here before any of us, so they deserve our attention. So, anyways, anybody have any questions? Be a family thing.
I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mary, have you started with permitting through Marina yet?
Yes, I filled out a permit for that date of August 10th. It's right, Maria?
Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday. Yep. We figured that was a sort of the least, during the week. It's not a weekend or anything like that. So yeah, she's got the permit in hand. We're not doing food or any of that kind of thing. So we're kind of keeping it simple.
Sounds great.
Well, great.
Marina, do you have any comment?
No comments. So we discussed with Mary everything. We discussed no commercial sales of merchandise or any kind of stuff at Children's Beach because it's a public park and commercial activities are restricted. We're just gonna work with Harbor Master just to see if they can do trips for kids and adults, make sure it's in a safe manner and it does not interfere with lifeguards responsibilities and duties. So it will be harbor master's call, because as you know, we have that boat ramp that is not gonna be allowed to be blocked in any way.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
we're just gonna work with harbor master, make sure that those activities can be approved and permitted by harbor master.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's all good.
Great.
Thank you.
Do you need us to vote on anything, or this is,
Just to show your support that you approving the use of Children's Beach for such and such activity, as long as it meets all the permitting conditions and requirements.
good? Okay, would somebody like to make that motion?
I will so move.
I'll second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mary.
thank you guys for your
Thank you.
time. I appreciate all that you do. So I can
worries.
leave, right? You don't need me?
No,
You know
you
how to
can't.
find me.
All right. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
You can leave. Okay.
Da-da-da.
Charlie?
Yeah, hi, how is everybody? It's been a couple months kind of settling in and trying to get caught up to speed on a lot of things here in the town. So, everything's moving forward and going great. We've got best place to start. We'll start with town playing fields. We had we rebid the field maintenance plan. And I kind of took what went out in the fall and really kind of trimmed it down to make it more about field maintenance instead of a lot of other things that were in the initial bid process. And we've got two good bids that have been turned in. Hopefully we'll have a decision and somebody signed up to take care of the fields for us for the next couple of years to kind of improve those and take a little bit of the weight off of the DPW.
That's good news.
Yeah, we're excited over here. as
Yeah,
far as
congratulations.
DPW. That's, it's a real strain. I think a lot of people forget how small the actual crew is with the DPW when they start getting stretched out, and to try to reshuffle for to get the fields mowed on time can be a little bit of a hassle. Let's see what else we have. I've been talking a little bit with the public school about possibly hosting their field hockey program this fall. I believe that's probably going to end up not being the case because they've decided to hit pause on their campus master plan until they can figure out what they're going to do with their two kind of multi-purpose AstroTurf fields. So we were working to try to help them out to create field space as they needed it. But I think for this year, that's going to be kind of tabled for now. Let's see, we've got the campus wire. We've got our town master plan that we've kind of been working on. And I know Gene and Brandon are here from Weston and Sampson, and we had a meeting the other day. I might turn it over to them. I can kind of take it from there if they want. Gene and Brandon, you guys on?
Yeah, be happy to do that. And Gene, sent over sort of a written narrative, but we'll definitely work through that for sure. So, Gene, you want to kick that off?
Yeah, why don't I, Brandon, and why don't I go through it fairly swiftly, realizing that the Parks and Rec Commission may have variable levels of interest in these different initiatives. But what I tried to do was summarize everything that's at play that's even remotely related to the mission of a Parks and Recreation Commission and might be of interest to you. And we can certainly focus on the sports and recreation parts of this. And we've developed a very strong understanding that there's tremendous stresses at play in Nantucket in regard to having enough well-performing, high-performing sports and recreation fields. And we want to help the commission, and we want to help others have an intelligent conversation about this and develop some real solutions to it. And with the hopes that some of the solutions can be accomplished in relative near term. And maybe some of them are a little bit more midterm, and maybe some of them are a little bit more long term. we wanted to kind of cover this at a high level tonight, and particularly to Tom and your commission, and to Maureen, get on your agenda for April and maybe delve into some more finer details relative, particularly to some of the options for improving facilities at Novadear, at Delta, and at Tom Nevers, given all of those things that are in play right now. Meaning the conversation about synthetic turf and the fact that that's complicated, issues associated with climate change, issues associated with the DPW potentially taking a portion of the historic footprint of Delta Fields, so on and so forth. And that was a lot of what we talked about with Charlie earlier in the week, and we thought it was a very productive conversation. So Maureen is sharing this spreadsheet. We'll probably come back to the first item and spend a little bit more time on that. So why don't I just skip through the ones that are below that. The Three Town Beaches concession study. This was a feasibility study. I think you folks might be aware of it. I would call it dormant at the moment. We're actually under contract. We have a purchase order. The charge was to look at the 3 beach facilities and develop a plan for improving them over a period of time. And that meant the concession and the building, as well as the other exterior assets, handicap ramps, access to beach fronts, parking areas, handicap parking, other accommodations and amenities at those 3 locations. So that's kind of in a holding pattern. It was being led by DPW, and we haven't been advised that there's a new champion over at DPW for that. The multi-use trail at Tom Nevers Road, we developed, I think, a very strong master plan. We're working with Andrew Vorse. We were working with DPW on that prior to the former DPW director's departure. We've been in touch with Andrew. He's anxious to move this to the next stage. So we've completed a master plan / feasibility study. We've come up with an alignment for that corridor. We've done some public outreach. We know that we've got a little bit more public outreach, and we'd like to go from the schematic design level really to finished designs and be at a point where we could bid that project and get it constructed. So we're developing a proposal now for Andrew and company to consider to take that project to the next level. Yeah, thank you very much. So the DPW facility, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it here today. Actually, Brandon, you might be a little bit more up to speed on this than I am based on a conversation with Jamie. So why don't you chime in for a moment?
Yeah, sure. And Charlie was also part of the conversation that Jamie, who's with Weston and Sampson, if you're not familiar, he's in our architect. He's one of our architects here at Weston and Sampson. He's been working with Stephen now that Stephen is the official DPW director. So they are regrouping this upcoming Monday. Charlie, I believe you're going to be part of that meeting as well, to really revisit the initial feasibility study under Stephen's perspective and refine that based on some updates that Stephen's bringing to the table, and as well as what Charlie is looking to do potentially at Delta, which we'll talk about shortly. But that is in process, and we are collaborating with the DPW to come up with some updates at Delta and Novadear.
And Brandon, why don't you continue on? You had a meeting. The next one was Tom Nevers, the bank
okay.
stabilization and solid waste. You had a meeting with other town representatives and CZM on
Yes,
Monday, I think it was.
And Charlie was also part of that meeting. We met with Coastal Zone Management and Army Corps on Monday earlier this week, and had a good conversation. We went through basically, we are looking to remediate some solid waste, and what can we do to be put back once we take out the solid waste and really try and stabilize the embankment from further erosion. Long story short, they really weren't too keen on making permanent bank stabilizations within their jurisdiction. The reasoning is because once you start messing with one area, it impacts downstream, upstream, however you want to look at it. It's just part of the natural process of a coastline to migrate and move around. What they did recommend was putting in temporary, they call them temporary berms, sand berms that would help mitigate some of the impact from wave action, coastal resilient tidal impacts. But it's definitely not a long-term solution for sure. It's not going to solve the coastal resilience problems. You know, from a Weston Sampson perspective, and I know there's been other studies done for this site specifically, you know, from a long-term perspective of really protecting Tom Nevers, it would happen at an area outside their jurisdiction would be the long-term coastal resilience process. But to mitigate the beach, the embankment, it would be more of a temporary solution, and then let Mother Nature continue on with moving the embankment over time.
Okay, and then the next item was the open space and recreation plan. The plan for the island, for the county, for the town of Nantucket has been out of date for a while, and we're working with Andrew Borse on this. We're going to connect with him in April with the with an interest in getting a draft submitted to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts later that month. And it's a key document because if this document is submitted, accepted by the state, it puts you folks in a strong position to actually seek and potentially secure funding for a whole host of park, open space, recreation type of initiatives. And the Commonwealth has been very aggressive in funding these programs in recent years. And in the face of COVID, they've almost doubled down, believe it or not, because there's even an increased emphasis on outdoor recreation and sports. And the federal government is even getting into play. So I've been at this for 35 years or so, and it seems like the funding is more plentiful at this moment in time from both state and federal resources. And that would include projects that would be of keen interest to the Parks and Rec Commission as well. So that's pushing forward. And then finally, before we go back to the town-wide sports and recreation component, the Noberdier Fieldhouse is under construction. Brandon, I don't know that John Como from our team has been able to join us or not, but he's the project manager. He had a meeting just this week on the project. Construction is pushing forward. Brandon, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Sure. And Charlie, I know you've been involved in some of the conversations on that, so please chime in. So John Como, another architect with Weston Sampson, he's the project manager for the Fieldhouse construction. And he indicated to me earlier today, you know, things are going well from a construction perspective. The biggest challenge thus far has really been supply chain issues. You know, he referenced specifically some doors. I don't know the details, but there's a 40-week lead time on some doors. So that's really the biggest delay in construction. It's not, you know, the actual design or the ability to do the work on the contractor side. It's just the availability of the materials and getting them to the island. My understanding, the actual wood trusses or beams are on island now, so those should be getting erected soon. From a overall construction standpoint, according to John, he said they're about 45 to 50% complete. So sounds like we're out of the ground and pushing things forward now vertically.
Yeah, I can update a little bit more on that if you want.
Please do.
Yeah, so the foundation and the footing, everything is poured. I believe the building is set to be start erection this week. I drove over to the site the other night, and the crane was on site in position. There was a couple new trailers and trucks for the people who erect the truss system. So I believe we should be seeing some structure this week and next week, as long as all the weather holds.
Okay, great. Thanks, Charlie and Brandon. So why don't I pause for a second? Any question? We plan to spend just a couple more minutes on the first one on this list. But why don't I pause for a second? Any questions about any of the other initiatives that we just rolled through fairly quickly? Chairman, other commissioners?
I don't have any questions. Thank you very much. It was a good update so far. Very good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Tom. So let's go back to the first one. This is the townwide Park and Recreation Master Plan, which of course was completed. Most of it was completed about 3 years ago. So the thinking is about 3 years old. And really the emphasis of that study was identifying a series of improvements that would get the town in a better place from a park, recreation, sports facility perspective. Everybody's very familiar with the deficit of fields on the island. The schools have a deficit of fields, too many programs. The town recreation programs, youth programs, adult programs, deficit of fields to support the programs. So it's a huge stress. And we've got to work together to find a way to begin to implement some meaningful improvements that start chipping away at this deficit of fields. And a couple of things happened since just 3 years ago when we had identified some action items. And those action items included upgrades to Nobadeer, most notably, upgrades to Nobadeer, to Delta Fields, and to the Tom Nevers property. So I hinted at the fact in regard to Nobadeer, the big play there was to implement a new synthetic turf field. And that's become complicated. We don't need to go into a lot of detail about that at this exact moment. And then at Delta, of course, it was to expand into the undeveloped area, develop much more field footprint. And then after that fact, and after adopting that strategy, the DPW facility feasibility study came along, which proposes to use a portion of the developed Delta Field property. So that caused us to step back and look at a different configuration of fields at that property. But importantly, we're using less of the developed area and relying more on the undeveloped wooded area in order to implement those improvements. And then climate change and understanding the dynamics of the changing coastline has also reared its head since we adopted a plan to improve Tom Nevers. So what we'd like to do, and we had actually put together a letter proposal, it was a relatively modest amount of money. We're actually still waiting for this PO, but we've started in good faith and we'll continue to make progress. And we'd like to present some very meaningful information to this commission next April, at the next meeting in April for you folks to consider. What we're looking at is developing some updated schematic plans for those three properties and focusing really on Nobadeer and Delta, where we think there's the greatest opportunity to achieve new field footprints. Review these plans with you folks, bring to you updated cost estimates associated with implementing the various strategies at these 2 or 3 properties, and then identify, a timeline associated with accomplishing the improvements. So Charlie was mentioning the fact that you folks put on the street, and it sounds like for the first time, a field maintenance contract. So that's great. And I trust you're folding in, a relatively robust level of attention that would allow the fields to be maintained at a high level and a high performing level for the various user groups. What we'd like to do is build off of that and identify ways to renovate existing footprints, construct new footprints, and then the timing is associated with that. So we know we've got to relieve pressure for the town recreation programs, for the school recreation programs. We also have to be aware that there's some construction activities that are going to be in play relative to the school campus. Some things might come offline in the short term, and we need to figure out how are kids going to get shifted around from place to place. So, for instance, at Noberdier, if it's not synthetic turf, let's just consider that potentially is another natural turf field footprint. And then in addition to the more robust maintenance of the existing 2 natural turf fields, maybe there's some additional intervention that we can do at those fields in the form of amending root zone mixes, growing media, in assessing what we've got for irrigation. And I know there's some struggles with well and service of water to that property. And what we could do in the form of drainage, what we might be able to do relative to affecting grading and improving that in the short term, so on and so forth. Same thing at Delta. You know, what can we do in the short term? Can we push forward with the development of some fields on the Milestone Road side of that property without any impact to the progression of the DPW facility project? So, and then Tom Nevers, I know that Charlie, you talked about some short-term improvements at Tom Nevers. We're talking about an unstable edge, but you know what, that unstable edge, it's going to play out over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's not going to impact perhaps in our lifetime and our kids and our grandkids' lifetime, some of the interior portions of that property. So even though the site is a little bit remote, can it still be part of the overall formula recipe for developing higher performing rectangular shaped playing fields? So these are all the things that we hope to look at over the course of the next week and be able to report back to you folks in more detail with some actual graphics and cost estimating and timeline strategies to respond to. I'll take a break. That was a long dialogue.
Well, no, I appreciate it. And I think you have your head properly wrapped around the scope of the problem, if that makes sense. You know, what's the genuine and sincere and important concern about these fields, you know, have to be vetted, and people are going to work through that. But I think it changes all of the good work that Weston and Sampson has done over the past, what, 5 years, I guess? How long have you been working on this?
Well, we probably started about 4 years ago, Tom, I would
Okay.
say. Yeah.
So we'll round it up to 5 years.
Okay.
And you know, just bear with me for a second, because
Sure.
we really have to get our heads around this. Otherwise, we're going to be spinning our wheels. So the town paid $120,000 to do a plan to Weston and Sampson. It was a thorough plan, carefully thought out, vetted by the community. If you look at the master plan, which I've done several times, you can see in the back that they had held numerous public meetings. Everybody signed in. I personally attended one. Very well run, very informative. The second thing is what really, I don't want to use the word concern, but it's kind of an oddity in the whole situation that we're in, is that there's a synthetic field out at Noberdier now. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. So somehow that was vetted, approved, and installed, but that's neither here nor there, but it is there. So the way I'm trained and in my profession, I always consider the downside. That's what I'm paid to do, is analyze the downside. So what happens to that synthetic field when its useful life is up? Obviously, we have to tear it up and get rid of it. So if they're not going to put them in, and this, my comments are not judgmental, they're just practical, sequential, and logistical. That's all. You know, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a lawyer. So if the town decides, for all the right reasons, that we're not going to go with synthetic fields, the question is going to be asked, why? Well, we have to tear up the Noberdier field. We have to assume that that's going to happen. At least that's what I would do. So we get rid of eventually that field's going to go away. It's going to be torn up because we're not going to be able to rebuild it or even repair it and put more stuff down, because I heard somewhere that those fields require maintenance where you have to put down more of those little beads, right? Is that true?
You have to
So that's not
supplement
going to
over
be
time.
allowed to happen. And certainly, we're not going to take on the liability and even suggest that it should happen if the town decides. So that field's going to go away. So
Well,
now we
we're
don't
probably gonna have to do some infill work within the next, next 12 to 18 months. Based on the compaction study that was done. And so there's an opportunity for us to take a step forward. Because that field right now is about at its half-life, so it should be good. The green synthetic part of the field its life should be about another 8 to 10 years. It's the infill, and so there's an opportunity for us to remove the crumb rubber infill that's there and go ahead with this, blanking on the name of the product.
Organic.
An
Yeah,
organic
the,
infill.
product that the school was going to use, which is basically it's called Brockfill. It's a virgin southern white pine. So it's a wood product. Basically, they break down the wood fiber, tumble it into these smooth wood pellets. And that's the new thing that everyone's going to. It's much more environmental. And when the life of those pellets is up, you could actually take it out and use it as a mulch someplace else when it's no longer good for playing on. Basically, then it just returns back to the environment. So there's a good opportunity for us to remove some of the problems there when we have to eventually kind of do a little work on this field. So that would be the way that I would lean when it comes to that turf field, because since we have it, I'd be very hard pressed to give it up, because we're going to need its capacity until we're able to expand with natural grass.
Well, I couldn't agree more. We're definitely going to need the capacity. And if there's a viable solution to the fields that are under discussion, then my comments are null and void, because we can just substitute what Charlie just described for the PCF. Is that true, Gene? Do you agree with that?
I think that's a logical approach, right? I mean, particularly since the field is not that old. It's still got a
I'm
lot of
talking about
life.
all the fields in general, the whole master plan. So I mean, in the master plan, both in the school master plan and the Parks and Rec master plan, there is the cornerstone of both is the use of artificial fields, regardless of what they're made of. I don't care what they're made of, but they're either in or out. And the people that are objecting to the fields, the artificial fields now, I mean, we can't really, in good conscience, move forward unless they sign off on what Charlie just described.
Yeah, I think with the school's thought with kind of tabling their things, hopefully the technology that somebody comes up with it to construct these synthetic fields without the use of these PFAS chemicals, I believe is their hope. So it could be by the time this field reaches the end of its life, we're at a new generation of synthetic turf fields, and we're able to then go ahead with that.
Right.
we'll
So
be planning-
basically, just to cut, I don't want to spend, we're getting a little circular here and it's
Yeah.
getting late. I think we need to ask, is there an artificial surface that everybody agrees is okay for the environment? Is there, yes, that's a yes or no question. Gene, is there a surface that everybody agrees?
Tom, it's a
Unfair
little bit of
question, I know, but
it's
it
a little
sounds
bit of
like
a trick question. And I would have to say, if we're observing what's happening in the public realm, the answer is no, because
Okay, I agree.
some people have not been able to be convinced that the
Right.
systems are safe despite what the science is saying.
I agree. I agree. So let's table that and just let me
Okay.
finish my thought, okay?
Please.
We have to go back to square one. At least as a plan B. Because plan A, which was carefully thought out, vetted, you couldn't have done a better job. You crossed your I's, dotted your I's and crossed your T's. So if it does happen, it's not going to happen within the next 5 years. It's not going to happen within the next 10 years. It's not going to happen. And so what we need to do is come up with a plan or an approach, and I think we have to have meetings that are very granular in nature, that we're not going to be able to have the kind of discussion that we need to have on Zoom calls once a month. Now, if it was me, if someone said, Tom, what would you like to see in lieu of the synthetic fields? Because you're not going to get them. So get it out of your head. What do you want? This is what I would want. I would want a game field for football, soccer, lacrosse, and field hockey. Game field only. And then I'd want practice fields. Okay? So you'd have a brand new football field that's only going to be used 6 times at the high school. You're going to have a soccer field that's only going to be used for the number of home games at the high school. Now, the other logistic thing that's a nightmare, quite frankly, 1 second, Michael, on the last point, is if you do accept Tom Desmond's plan, where are the kids going to practice? Well, they're going to have to go over to Nobadir. So after school, you're going to have to get them on a bus, put all their equipment in the bus, drive them over there, which that alone is going to take you 45 minutes. You got to get them on the bus. You got to get them off the bus. You got to stretch after the bus. And then you got to get them back to the school. Their parents pick you up. But you know where I'm going with this. Go ahead, Michael. You had your hand up.
Well, I want to ask a question for clarification, Tom. When you say a game field, you mean a different game field for each sport, not one game field that serves all sports, right?
Correct. A game field for each sport.
So I understand that thinking from the perspective of a coach and player and referee and over 40 years, especially a coach. Most coaches want to play on the field that they're practicing on. They don't want to shift. Now, yes, you can make it the same size, and there are some things that you can do, but there's a certain, that's why they call it a home field advantage. So that's one thing that I would say. So I'm not sure that all coaches would necessarily agree with you there. And then the other point that I would make, and I certainly do not speak for the schools anymore, but I think you have to think about the practicality of transporting young kids versus older kids. And I'm not sure that it's practical to transport your middle school kids for their games back and forth, where it might be practical to do the same thing to do that for high school kids.
You're absolutely right. It's impractical. That was my point. That's my point. It's not practical at all.
These are things that,
And just in terms of practice fields versus, like, the only sports I played basketball, and that's about it. And I ran cross. I didn't play football. I played soccer 1 year. And so but I've never seen a football team practice on their game field. Never. And I don't like doing things on the cheap when it comes to kids. So you can rotate this, you can rotate that. And I hear where you're coming from. I'm not disagreeing with you, Michael, at all. I hear where you're coming from.
Where I would agree with you is that, particularly in the sport of football, you want to do much of your training, like your linemen and some of that off the field. You don't want to be ruining your game field for that. But I'm not sure that they would want to do all of their training on a separate field, just offering that perspective.
No, they do. They do walkthroughs. Again, I'm not taking sides, okay? I really am not, because
I know.
I'm just not. I'm looking at this as a businessman.
Yep.
That's all. I'm looking at it as a businessman. That's how I'm looking at it. And if we don't go, not having the artificial turf option available to us changes everything. everything. Everything that's been done up to this point is moot.
And I understand that, and I also understand the risk of bringing soccer and lacrosse groups together on this island after some of the wars that they had years ago. But I think we need to get the perspective of coaches.
No, I agree.
And
I
I'm
don't
not sure
disagree, but
that,
you know something, the
we
flip
have that.
side of that, okay, and again, I'm not being contentious. We're having Michael, you and I are having a business discussion now, okay? That's all we're having.
yep,
So if let's say I run sports on Nantucket, okay? And I tell the coaches what to do. They don't tell me what to do. Okay, so if I tell them they're not going to practice on a game field, they're not going to practice on a game field. And if I tell them they're only going to have the games on the nice field for the kids, they're going to have I know that sounds crazy, but that's the way I approach it.
I just would say that the idea of having a czar of sports, and I know you're being tongue in cheek here, but it isn't that simple as you get pushback from players and parents and coaches. It becomes if you will, a political football.
No, I don't, and again, I'm not just trying to appease you. You're absolutely right. And I was just trying to make a point. That's all I'm trying to do. But you know, there's a dilemma that I'm not sure we can overcome if we don't have synthetic fields. Now, if people want to carve out an extra 10 acres on Nantucket to solve this problem, then carve out 10 extra acres on Nantucket to solve the problem, fund it, and be prepared to take the kids on school buses all over the island and have them chew up another 45 minutes out of their day, getting from point A to point B.
I understand your point.
It's
and
logistics.
I do believe that we need to, as quickly as we can, develop new fields, especially if that issue at Nobadeer ramps up and people start asking for the removal of that field. If that happens, then we have to have alternative fields ready and begin some kind of rotation of those fields. That's the problem that's happened at the high school when you've got 6 teams playing on a soccer field.
Can't happen. So to your point, to your point, Michael, and we're in agreement on everything. I'm just looking at it from a different angle, okay? That field that nobody has got to go. If you're not going to have an artificial field at the high school, someone's going to say, get rid of that field at Nobadeer.
Someone's going to say,
because when I looked at the meetings that they had, I looked at the workshop and the meetings, and nobody said, well, instead of having this type of artificial turf, let's have this type of artificial turf. And Gene just said, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but nobody seems to agree that artificial turf is a solution. So that's fine. I can live with that. I'll live with whatever they want us to live with. But we need at least 10 more acres, and we need a way to figure out to get the kids around. Because what I did pick up on one of those meetings is that the Massachusetts athletic programs condemned the Nantucket field at one point. They said they couldn't have an event on the high school football field. And I don't blame them, because that field has always looked terrible. And that field should only be, I'm repeating myself, 6-7 times a year tops. It should never be practiced on. They should do walkthroughs. And the same with the other fields. And you can't expect women's sports to double and triple up on a field. They have to have their own field for their sport. If you don't want to have artificial turf, then you got to do it the right way to alleviate the problem that's been on the table forever. That's all I have to say. So my final closing point on that is, you're back to square one, Mr. Bollinger.
Well, so the conversation, we get it. And, the answer, geography is its own different issue, right? You know, where a facility is located geographically within a community. So those nuances you're describing about transporting kids, they're unique from town to town. And they don't seem to be in your favor on Nantucket, where you have limited land resources at the school campus. So you can only accomplish so many footprints to begin with. And then if they're all natural turf, they can only sustain a certain level of programming. So that causes you to look to different locations. If synthetic turf fields are not part of the formula to deliver high performing fields to a community, then you simply need more of the natural turf field footprints. And this rules of thumb, but you could make the point that if you can't get a synthetic turf field that might accommodate 2,000 hours of use on an annual basis, you're going to need 3 natural turf fields to make up for that. Where
Correct,
you can
yeah.
limit the usage to 500 or 600 hours. And that's assuming that those natural turf fields are constructed to state-of-the-art standards, which your fields are not, like many communities. So these are some of the things that we'd like to delve into. I think we've come away, Tom, just by paying attention to some of these conversations that are going on, that we're going to have to find a way to construct additional footprints beyond what we were thinking in this 2020 master
Yeah.
plan.
So, and again, I apologize for my tone of voice, but I always talk like this. I got a big mouth. I apologize. Last thing, Maureen, do you have that spreadsheet I sent you?
Yeah, actually, Vince has been patiently waiting. He was
I'm
going to
sorry,
go
go ahead,
over
Vince. I apologize. Go ahead.
some of the impacts out at Tom Nevers that the Coastal Resilience
Go
Z
ahead,
has been
Vince.
discussing.
Go ahead.
Is it okay if I share screens, Maureen?
Absolutely.
Sure. So
Thank you.
no worries. Brendan and Jean have caught a lot of what I was going to present and talk about. So the main thing that I kind of wanted to bring up to the commission is the last time I presented here, we raised the issue of the erosion and the resilience issue as it was, I think about last September, October, that kind of time, roughly speaking. And since then, the Coastal Resilience Plan was completed in November, went to select board and was finally approved and finalized and finished and accepted by the select board on January 12th. So we have a finished document. There's some slides in here that you've seen before. They might be a refresher, the first 3. And then the 4th through 7th slides are new info from the CRP or other locations. So you guys all know this intimately. We have 3 erosion zones, 2030, 2050, and 2100. The red line is all you guys need to take into account here. That anything on the ocean side of that line is kind of critical. And this was what we, can you see my presentation okay? Yes, there we go. Now we're presentation mode. So anything that was south of the red line in relation to what you had planned is what we discussed previously and what has been the main subject of the debate here tonight. So I won't bore you with this other than to show it on screen because it would be useful to see. So we understood some of these. I presented these facts about anything seaward of the 2050 red line, about the issues with the meandering footpath, how that it might just not be there in a while, and how the amenities at the top of the bluff or adjacent to the dune should just be limited. That was the basic tenor of this, and I have a pretty good feeling the commission has got that point and understood it. Just to show you what was in the CRP, they did have some recommendations. That legend bothered me, it was a bit small, so I made a bigger one. They recommended some dune restoration for the base of the bluff, elevated dune walkway to the beach, and an access point to walk down if you're going to create an impediment to getting on the beach. So they figured put that kind of thing in. Point 3, also on the front of the dune, an erosion monitoring to inform park design strategy, just basically some nice signage for people. And then reduced density in the area. That is not relevant to the commission. It was just a recommendation for the general area. So this is basically the outcome and what they worked out and tried to understand would be useful to create a new dune in that area. So they estimated for the full length of the area that I'd shown on screen, which is a couple of 100 yards either side of the Tom Nevers Park property, would be about 13 million. That was the capital cost. The contingency cost was in the region of 16 to 18 million, with an annual cost of about 200 million for maintenance. Sorry, $200,000 for maintenance. This would only gain you about $7.1 million in avoided damages. Now, this isn't fair. This is what you can calculate. It's only 7.1 million in estimated benefits, but it does not include an estimate of the use of the area by the public enjoyment, fairs, events, and other aesthetic value of the area. We can't calculate that easily or well, so that's not included. But if you were to put some values to that, it seriously ups that 7.1 million in what we can estimate. That's mainly just land value and the materials that will be put in the area under any construction. So here's the general chart for all the design pathways in the South Shore. This here is the part for Tom Nevers Field for the erosion mitigation project. This assumes that this would begin around 2025 for the sake of argument to be concluded and in place and working for around 2035, and lays out essentially a plan that gets the area some stability and resilience going out towards the end of the century. So this is a very simple slide, and I'm very happy I included it because it's quite relevant to the discussion that was going on here tonight. I understand that Brandon and Jean have spoken to CZM. CZM are a terrific organization, and they give good advice. Sometimes I do feel personally that their advice can be somewhat narrow, but then you have to also take into account that these are the people that do approve these things. So what they say is permissible on their website and how the feelings of the people who you're speaking to can vary just a little bit. They might be able to see a permit for something like this or take a waiver if needs be for some project, but you also have to understand the scale of the project you're talking about. So we were talking in the CRP about an artificial dune restoration type project, but that's only one point on a scale. So the further to the left of this scale for the greener infrastructure, the soft techniques and this spectrum here, that's the more natural and to some extent is probably, for want of a better description, somewhat of the less costly side of the scale. It's also probably the more permissible side of the scale once we talk to CZM. As you move to the right on this and move to the grayer, the harder techniques, you're moving into the first, the more difficult, and then second, once you get to breakwaters, revetments, and bulkheads, probably never to illegal in Massachusetts, or just about impossible in such an active coastal shoreline area. Just to put that out there, these are on the scale, these can be considered, but the chances of getting a permit, I don't mean to upset anyone, would be nil or nil for many decades at the very, very least. Please don't take that negatively. Just to give you the idea, roughly speaking, nobody likes to talk about this, but over the other end, on the east end of the island, the geotubes at the base of Sconset Bluff, just below Baxter Road, they fit somewhere between Edging and Sill, roughly speaking, on this graph. They're something of a harder type of installation that have green infrastructure on top of them for sediment on top of them, sand basically, to contribute to the beach. They do work, they have a certain view on this island that has not worked in their favor. It is quite true. They're an effective product, they do work, but the publicity and the press around them has been less than favorable. To be able to do something like that or a toned down version of that for smaller, narrower geotubes or smaller, narrower core logs with a planting and a nourishment infrastructure to go with it for a few years to gain life and add resilience to an area to slow down the erosion rate. Not stop, I don't think we can ever do that, but to add life expectancy to the park area and keep acreage, importantly, for a greater length of time is certainly a possibility. And if CZM are amenable to something on the lower end of this living shoreline type scale, that will be beneficial. And the closer to the bank edge, the better. And taking in the bank itself and maybe some stabilization at the top of the bank to prevent material coming down over time can all help. I'm not talking hard, I'm talking plantings. I bet that brings up questions.
Yeah, they did say ultimately, so they own, their jurisdiction is bank and ocean bound. Once you get to the bank and land bound, it's a DEP conversation. Unfortunately, just because they're an agency and it took us long enough to get to CZM and Army Corps, DEP was not able to participate in that meeting. But they all talk, they all will see the same set of plans. They did say, anything landside, ultimately that's DEP's jurisdiction. So if we can make a compelling case on the land side, for sure, once you get to the embankment, that's more definitely no walls. And their thought process was just to mitigate off-site impacts as a result of anything that we would do here. It would be a long-term management plan, not necessarily something that would be a permanent solution. It's more about managing is their perspective. So it would be an annual sand replacement cost because the sand is going to move back and forth, up and down, and it would have to be monitored. But as I noted earlier, the real long-term solution is going to be land-bound and not earth or water side. So no matter what, whatever jurisdiction you want to deal with, it's all about working with them. And the best, easiest solution would be going to the edge of DEP's jurisdiction, and outside of that, determining what you want your permanent solution to be. But you're going to lose more land if that's your boundary. So, and Vince, please chime in, and others.
So just if I could catch up with it, if it's okay, Tom. I think that was, yes. Tom was muted, but I think he said okay. He's still okay. So you can still do some stuff to increase longevity. I'm not talking hundreds of years. I'm talking a few decades on the bank side. This is part of the planning process. It also gains you time to do work on the top of the bank as well. They could be done in tandem, definitely, to work to gain longevity. But doing work on the bank face, the base of the bluff, they do require application to Concom to go through DEP and CZM, and that is just an application process. For the most part, once you have a solid plan, and that is the core that they need, is a solid plan with the appropriate funding and the appropriate way to go forward with an operation and maintenance manual and such, then you generally end up in a more favorable footing. But it is an application process. They could turn you down. It is absolutely true. They might not like elements of it, and that is a time concern and a financing concern. So that it's not without risk, but you could gain time.
Well, Vince, you have an impossible job. That's all I got to say.
I think you told me that the last time too. So these are actually real world examples, and these are things that are lessons learned on Baxter Road. and what's possible there, and other parts of the island as well. So the Natural Resources Department takes in all the Concom filings, and I get to see a lot of the applications that are coming in for various parts of the island for various projects and individual property owners' property, and some of the innovative things that people are doing to slow erosion rates are improving all the time. So I know that there's a fatalistic approach where people frequently tell me, you can't stop the ocean. I never said I wanted to stop the ocean. I said I wanted to slow it down a little. And I never said I was going to win. I said I was just going to slow it. But if you're willing to try and keep acreage for longer, there's also another fringe potential benefit in the offing. The state is coming around to look to reviewing how it's going to deal with climate issues, particularly sea level rise issues. So there may be a point to trying to change, to gain longevity for a site, so that if laws were to change in the near future, you could gain more time until you get to a position where we might be able to do harder infrastructure to fix an area's resilience issues. But that has an inherent risk that it might never happen.
Well, Vince, if any plan's going to work, it's yours, okay? Because you've done a good job. And, you know, I almost passed out when you put up the cost of the numbers, but it is what it is. But I mean, Maureen, could you put the slide up that Vince put up where it showed the different lines on the field? Because I want to point something out to the guys at Weston and Sampson.
I think I have that, Maureen.
explained it.
Thanks, Vince.
And it ties into the use of soccer fields and whatever.
This one here, Tom?
Yeah, the one with the red line on it. Yeah.
I'll make this full screen now. This what you want?
Yeah. So to the Weston and Sampson guys and everybody else, you know, let's assume that Mother Nature has its way and takes everything up to that blue line. You see that blue line, the first blue line? So just draw that straight across and that's all gone. So if you go up to the top dotted line where the corner of the basketball court is and draw that all the way across, that could be one open green area where we could continue to have the softball and soccer practice fields for little kids. That's just a thought of mine. And you could probably do it. There's already an irrigation system out there that I was told is working. So, you know, theoretically, you could have grass from the far left all the way over to the far right, to the road, essentially. And that grass could be multi-purpose. There's already softball there. There's already soccer. It's a heavily used area. And it just needs to be tiered and it needs to be fixed up a little bit. So that's, I don't want to get into the details, but that's one possibility. And I know it's getting late, so we don't have to look at the spreadsheet tonight. We could look at it another time. But I do think that my closing thought is we as a group have to figure out a way to drill down into the problem and try to figure out meaningful solutions. And I don't think it's something we can do once a month. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we can set up, you know, calls with Weston and Sampson for a half an hour here and a half hour there to share ideas so they can put together a drawing or whatever the agreed upon solution is going to be. I don't know what people have thoughts on that. Maybe I'm over reacting to the problem, but I think we have to go back to square one. No other way for me to put it. I'm sorry.
Well, Tom, that's a lot of what Brandon and Gene and I have already started to talk about. It's a major part of what my job description was. I think it was actually the biggest part of my job description when I was hired, was reviewing and making changes and adjustments to this town master plan. So everything you talked about today is stuff we've started to talk about for plans. So hopefully we'll probably meet a few times between now and the next meeting. So hopefully in April, we can have something to present to you that'll show you a couple different versions of layouts. One to say somehow the magic happens, the school gets to synthetic fields. We still need to accommodate for the growing rec sports. So this is what this might look like, or forget synthetics altogether. And this is what that layout might look like. So hopefully we'll have something like that drawn up for you for April.
Okay, so on that point, I'm glad to hear that. So I read in the paper today that it's going to be tabled for up to 2 years. Okay,
Yep.
then it
which-
goes out to bid.
Yep,
Okay, that's 6, 9 months. And then they have to construct it, add another 2 years. So before there's any use of those synthetic fields, if they come online at all, let's say 5 years. Okay, so in the meantime, you know what we have to do. We
yeah,
have to accommodate everybody. So what I would do, hold on, let me finish. I would, is there any other conservation land that borders Nobadeer? Is there conservation land that borders Nobadeer that's owned by an authority, by the city?
On the other side of Milestone.
On the other side of Milestone?
Yeah, I mean, on the Delta side is, that whole plot, I think is like 104 acres.
Right, so
Yeah. The airport
Yeah,
owns
but
most
it
of
gets
that.
I would look at getting that's where your spot's gonna be. And if you have to get a bulldozer and knock down those trees, you get a bulldozer and knock down those trees, because you can't have your cake and eat it too. So you got 100, go ahead, Vince.
I would be remiss from the Natural Resources Department if I didn't address that, and I do apologize, Tom, and you're not going to enjoy this. There's a rare moth that lives in those trees.
There's a
Please
what?
a rare moth.
Oh, we
It's a
don't want to hurt him, so leave him be. I withdraw
you.
my comment. I withdraw my comment. I'm not going to take on a rare moth, that's for sure. I'm actually a conservationist. So the bottom line is we have to find more land. That's the bottom line.
I
And it's
think
at
that's
least
right.
10 acres, at least
I-
10 acres.
Yeah, I think that's right. And to build off of what Charlie was conveying, we certainly be in a good position to present some additional information a month hence. Okay, there's no question. But we're also amenable to being on island, to having a separate workshop to kind of roll up our sleeves and work through this side by side, face to face. If you folks think that that's something that's desirable to do, we'll often. This is a regular monthly meeting. You have an agenda. There's multiple
Right.
items on it. You have the ability, I trust, to hold a special meeting. That could be a workshop that's really just focused on this matter at hand that we're discussing right now. And there might be some
Yeah.
benefit in that, whether it's, in May or whenever.
Yeah, I just, we, as a business person, I'm at the mind says, okay, we're just gonna have to go with natural grass fields. We have to have a plan for that. Otherwise, we're kidding ourselves. And that we're gonna lose a synthetic field at some point that we have.
I think from our standpoint, Tom, what we would be looking at is different scenarios, right? It's like, okay, if your synthetic turf field can stay in play and stay in place for X number of years, that's one scenario. How many synthetic turf fields do we need to meet the demand? And that's another thing we didn't really talk about a lot tonight, but we have matrices that identify the level of demand. And we know we have to get to a point where we've got fields that are really just receiving 500-600 hours a year, okay? So it's gonna be math. How many fields do we need? If you have synthetic turf, it's X number of fields. If you have natural turf, it's X. If it's some combination, it's XX. And we'll be able to talk about that. But I think you're exactly right. We've already started thinking in terms, okay, well, in the short term, at least, we get to retain the synthetic turf field. But maybe longer term, 5 years out, 10 years out, the stomach is not there to replace it. So we should be forecasting that, 5, 10 years out. But I think these are some of the logistical things that we would look to work through. And the diagrams have to start to reflect the number of footprints you need to support the level of programming that you've got, both on the community side and the school side.
All right, well, everybody, does anyone else have any comments or Ed? Thank you very much, Gene. And Brandon. Maureen,
Okay.
anyone else would make a motion to adjourn for the evening?
So moved.
Seconded,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. I thought it was very productive.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thank you.
everybody. Have a good evening.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Night.
Night.
Aye.